So welcome everybody. So happy to see you here. I'm Jonathan Lear. I'm the director of the Neubauer Collegium for Culture and Society. So happy, we have a number of research projects that we sponsor, but there's none that I feel happier about having than the Contours of Black Citizenship that Jessica Baker and Adam Gadichu and Yanilda Gonzalez have been working on over the past years around issues, well, just obviously what it says, the issues of Black citizenship in a global context. One of the things I think we aspire to do is to try and bring art and artistic expression into the realm of scholarly work and try and break down those barriers too. This is a wonderful exhibition. We're so lucky to have Carmenza Banguera with us for a exhibition that we've been trying to get you here for a long time. The visible, the laughable, and the invisible. I don't want to take any more time with introductions. I just want to hand over to Dieter Rollstratter, who will tell you about the exhibition itself. But just welcome to all of you and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. Yes, so as Jonathan already mentioned, my name is Dieter Rollstratter. I'm the curator here at the Neubauer Collegium for Culture and Society. And it's been a year and a half that I did this, talk to a crowd in person at an art event. So it's well, it'll take some getting used to. But I only have a minute to introduce this event, so I won't get used to it. But what I want to say about that is the last time people gathered on the occasion of art here at the Neubauer Collegium was for the opening of an exhibition in March 2020. And it's been since then, so a year and a half really, that we've had to wait for an occasion to once again be together. And as a curator, of course, it's humbling to realize that it is art that does that in a way, that it's an exhibition that will compel us getting together. And as Jonathan mentioned, this exhibition opened in late May because of the global health hazard. Carmenza at that time was not able to travel here, but she finally managed to do so.
Although it might look like we did, but it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this event. As Jonathan and Dieter said, I'm part of a group of people, Jessica Baker, who's over there, Yanilda Gonzalez, who couldn't be with us today, who's been working on an interdisciplinary research project entitled The Contours of Black Citizenship in Global Context. And basically, since 2018, we've been collectively thinking through what the intersections and entanglements of race and citizenship in hemispheric and global perspective. And as part of that, we thought very seriously about how to interrogate and incorporate the arts broadly conceived as part of our research program. So we were very excited that the Neubauer Collegium included the opportunity to use the gallery space. And we were very, very excited to have Carmenza Banguera commission her basically to do a show for us. So she visited Chicago in 2019 from Cali, Colombia, a long time ago. Was it 2019, 2018? I don't remember actually. And got an opportunity to think about the intersections of race and citizenship as they appeared in Chicago and in relationship to her home city of Cali, Colombia. The exhibition that's on view comes out of her meditation on those connections. And as Jonathan said, we'll have opportunity to see that in small groups after we're done. But it's also a real opportunity then to have this conversation, Blackness and Belonging from Cali to Colombia, to bring together Carmenza Banguera with a local artist, Lola Ogbara. So what I'm going to do is introduce them, give them formal introductions. And then Lola is going to start us off talking a little bit about her practice and the intersections she sees between her work and Carmenza's work. Carmenza will respond to that. I'll ask a few questions and then open it up to all of you to ask questions as well. So here are my introductions. Carmenza Banguera is a visual artist based in Santiago de Cali, Colombia. She received a Master's of Plastic Arts from the Departmental Institute of Fine Arts in Cali. Her work has been included in various forums, such as the 45th Salón Nacional de Artistas and independent exhibitions in the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Ecuador, and Colombia. Her primary subject of exploration is Afro-Colombian and Afro-Latino identity, specifically approached from concepts like cliché, ethnicity, race, racism, and taboos, such as resentment, paranoia, victimization. Banguera constructs her work from the observation of context and their contemporary behavior, thus abstracting the forms through which identity is assumed and showing how ethnic social recognition crosses the boundaries of the merely cultural. Banguera uses multiple formal means to create her artworks. In recent years, her work has been characterized by the uses of techniques such as sculpture, drawing, installation, and ready-mades, among others. And she's been collaborating with us basically since her visit in 2018. Lola Ayisha Ogbara is a cultural worker and artist who was born and raised in Chicago. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Arts Entertainment and Media Management from Columbia College, Chicago, and an MFA in Visual Arts from Washington University's Sam Fox School of Art and Design. In 2017, Ogbara co-founded Artists in the Room, a collective of artists and scholars who hosts artists emerging and well-known in hopes of serving as a catalyst for artistic development and networking. Ogbara has received numerous fellowships and awards, including the Multicultural Fellowship sponsored by NCESAFE's 52nd Annual Conference and the Arts and Public Life and Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture residency here at the University of Chicago. She's exhibited in galleries across the country and is currently based in Chicago. So as I've said, you'll see Carmenza's work after we're done here. But if you also visit the event page on the Neubauer site, you'll find a link to Lola's website where you can see her work. I also want to let you know that she will be part of a group exhibition at the Arts Incubator that opens on October 9th. And the Arts Incubator is at 55th and Prairie. So we hope you'll also go check that out. So I'll turn it over to Lola.
Thank you, Adam. Is it on? Okay, we're on. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lola Ayisha Ogbara, and I'm happy to be here with you all this evening. I want to start by giving you all some insight to my art practice. As an artist whose identity is based primarily in the intersections of Blackness, queerness, womanhood, my practice becomes a space in which I'm able to process these circumstances situated within these identities. So whether that's occurring in the past, present, and the future, the subjugation of identity, gender, and sexuality is an entity that I examine very closely. Alongside the tensions of hypervisibility and invisibility that comes with that identity, as well as the strength and vulnerability in that as well. As far as mediums, there are a few mediums that I use to get my messages across. One of those being ceramic arts, currently focused in that medium. There's also installation, photography, and sound that I'm also using at the moment. I explore the implications of the body surrounding gender and race in the context of racial voyeurism. I also use the body form as well as the absence of the body to contemplate complexities of labor, pleasure, and desire as an ongoing search for due process. Through my material usage and composition, I emphasize on the nexus between Western colonialization and how Black identities see themselves in order to further progress a future that creates its own history. So that's a bit of an excerpt from my artist statement there. But I'll go into sharing with you all my experience with Carmenza's work. I had the pleasure of viewing that yesterday. The visible, the laughable, and the invisible, right? During that, I was able to get a artist-led tour from Carmenza herself, which gave me a lot of insight. And we were able to talk about a lot of the similarities within our work, as well as the similarities of Black American life, as well as Afro-Latino, Latinx life across the diaspora. One of those similarities that I found very compelling was our use of the invisible and the invisible, right? I tend to play on those tensions in my work in a commemorative way and both an implicative way. On one hand, the work that I do, for example, my more performative work, becomes a way to commemorate aspects of Black life and Black contribution to the world, mostly via labor, whether that's physical labor or mental labor or sexual labor. And on the other hand, my sculptural work and my photography-based work focuses on the presence or the non-presence of the body in a more implicative practice of disruption. Using parts of the body or the subject matter by repeating maybe certain gestures or certain folds or certain images, cropping and obscuring becomes an important layer of the work as far as implicating a disruption of access, a disruption of the gaze. And so when I'm using the body and when I'm using the corpulent body, I'm referencing a collective of feminine forces who served as an anchor in my own life. This reference becomes a way in which I both uplift these identities while protecting their identities simultaneously, both challenging the viewer to look within their own self-awareness, to then question why the mere sight of a body or the Black body, whether an obscured or a photo of that, made them feel, think, or imagine the way that they did. And so the visible and the non-visible in Carmenza's work, I saw quite vividly. Visible being the scientific aspect of Blackness, the scientific gaze, or on the other hand, of biological racism. Carmenza, do you want to comment on those aspects of your work?
Hola a todos.
Hello, everyone.
Entiendo un poco de inglés, pero voy a hablar en español porque las reinas hacen que traduzcan para tener más tiempo en la respuesta.
Yeah, I understand some English, but I'm going to use an interpreter because as the queens do, they use an interpreter just to have a little more time to be able to think about the answers.
Bueno, para hacer comentarios un poco sobre esta exposición,
Just to comment a little bit about this exposition.
me gustaría remontarme en el momento en que se pensó por primera vez en la exposición.
I'd like to go back to the time where, the first time that, I came up with this exposition.
Me gusta hablar mucho sobre las memorias y pienso que como artistas básicamente hacemos el trabajo de ser narrativos.
Yeah, I like memories a lot. And as artists, I think I enjoy the work of being narrative.
Entonces voy a empezar la historia
So
cuando conocí a Yanilda González.
I'm going to start the story when I met Yanilda González.
Era el año de 2018-2017.
It was around 2018.
y yo estaba en la Universidad Nacional de Colombia, que queda en la capital,
And I was at the National University of Colombia, located in the capital.
invitada como artista plástica a hablar sobre las africanías colombianas.
And then I was invited as a plastic artist to talk about the African elements of Colombia.
Yo siempre he sido un poco distraída,
I've always been a bit distracted,
o más bien interesada en lo que otros no se interesan.
you know, and to better say it, I've been, interested in people, in things that most people don't get interested in.
En esta ocasión hice una charla, hablé sobre mi trabajo y tiempo después tomé mi maleta y me fui. No continué compartiendo tiempo con el panel.
Yeah, and then at that time I shared about my work, and then I packed up my bags and I left, and I did not spend any more time with the panel.
Y en esta huida perdí la oportunidad de conocer a Yanilda.
And at that time I left, I missed the opportunity to meet Yanilda.
Pasó un año y estando en Cali, donde resido y trabajo además en el Museo de Arte de la ciudad,
And then, a year went by, and then I was in Cali where I lived, and I work at the National Museum of Art.
una amiga, Mauri,
A friend of mine, Mauri,
dice, hay una chica de Chicago que te está buscando.
she said to me, there is a lady here from Chicago that's looking for you.
Yo dije, ¿no tiene Facebook?
And then I said, doesn't she have Facebook?
Efectivamente, Yanilda no usa Facebook.
And in fact, Yanilda does not use Facebook.
Entonces le dije, no, ven al museo y tomamos un café.
And then I said, okay, I had to come to the museum and we'll have some coffee.
Resulta que Yanilda había estado dentro del público en el panel en Bogotá.
And she had been in the audience during the panel in Bogota.
Y ella se había quedado con una frase que yo dije,
And she had remembered a phrase that I mentioned,
que el problema de mi ciudad, Cali, era que la ciudad no decía somos una población altamente afro, sino que decía tenemos una población altamente afro.
that the people in Cali would say the phrase that, they didn't say we are an Afro population. They would say we have a population of, Afro descendants.
Entonces siempre he tenido como esa noción de que hay una objetualización también de la población en la ciudad donde resido.
And then I've had that notion that there is an objectivizing of that population where I reside.
Y parte de mi producción como artista trata de esto.
And part of my production as an artist actually reflects that.
Entonces Yanilda me dijo que tenía un colectivo de investigadoras
And then Yanilda told me that she had a group of people that would do research.
y que dentro de lo que estaban planeando para ese año estaban pensando tener también una participación en el espacio que era la galería.
And as part of what they were planning to do that year, that they had planned and creating some space in the gallery.
Y lo primero que uno piensa por ser económico
And part of what you think, because, being, economical,
es, vamos a mostrar lo mejor que tengo, ¿no? Que ya se hizo.
yeah, we're going to show you, what the best thing that I have already done.
Pero existía también la oportunidad de conocer el contexto de Chicago.
But the opportunity presented itself to also get to know the context of Chicago.
Porque como al igual que me imagino un gran porcentaje de personas tenía una noción de Norteamérica televisiva.
Yeah, that along with many people, I had the opinion and notion through television of the United States.
Una versión Disney del asunto.
Yeah, a Disney version of things.
Entonces, hago una inmersión, una visita primera a Chicago.
So I had my first visit to immerse myself in Chicago
En el 2019.
in 2019.
Y cuando llego, me pasa algo increíble, para mi parecer.
And as I arrived, something incredible happened to me from where I, as I thought.
Y era que mi familia caminaba en gran porcentaje en las calles.
And my family was actually walking around a lot on the streets.
¿Qué digo cuando hablo de mi familia?
And what am I trying to say when I say my family?
Cuando estás en Latinoamérica, por ejemplo, en la capital de Colombia, Bogotá,
When you're in when you're in Latin America, like in the capital in Colombia,
pueden pasar cuadras sin ver a alguien similar a ti.
that you can walk for blocks without looking at anybody that is not similar to you.
Pero donde vivo, que es Cali,
But where I live in Cali,
sí puedes ver similares.
you can see similarities.
Entonces yo imaginé que tal vez al salir y estar en el norteamericano, sueño norteamericano,
Yeah, and I thought that as I left and I came to live the American dream,
pues iba a estar en una segunda Bogotá.
that I thought I was gonna be in Bogota again.
Pero encuentro una segunda Cali.
But what I found was a second city of Cali here.
Y encuentro además una especie de sectorización, de desarrollo, de participación negra.
And I also find that there are groupings and sectors of Black participation.
Y es que, por ejemplo, en el museo en que trabajo en Cali,
Yeah, like for example, in the museum where I work in Cali,
no ves una diferencia tonal entre las personas que hacen de operativos y los ejecutivos.
there is no significant difference that you can perceive between the people that actually are management and the people that are actually doing the work.
Cuando llegué a los museos acá, vi que mis similares
And then when I came to the museums here, I did see that people similar to me,
tenían específicos roles.
they had specific roles.
Entonces eran muchas carmenzas siendo custodias de las salas.
Yeah, and there were a lot of Carmenzas that were in charge of the rooms, the exhibit rooms.
Y las carmenzas, que son las personas que hacen el trabajo que yo hago, que es un poco ejecutivo, no se parecían a mí.
And the Carmenzas that do the type of work that is more administrative, like me, they were not like me.
Entonces comencé a ver todo este tipo de segregación o separación en el desarrollo de, digamos, los perfiles o los empleos o lo que se hace.
And I started seeing all the type of segregation and differences between the type of jobs and work that is being performed and being carried out.
Es demasiado claro.
And then that it is extremely clear.
En Cali no pasa eso. Estamos pasando por la época donde se objetualiza al negro, digamos, y todavía se dice tener un orgullo de todos los aportes culturales que se tienen.
Yeah, and in Cali, I don't necessarily see that. We're going through a stage right now where Blackness is objectivized, and actually we are aware of the contributions that they have, that the Blackness have actually made.
Entonces, ahí nace, digamos, esta primera relación con lo que es visible.
And then that's where the first concept came about for what I call the visible.
Entonces, ya estando como reflexionando sobre los oficios,
Yeah, and as I was actually pondering, the different types of jobs,
comienzan a ver como unas revelaciones que pasa algo sobre el cuerpo.
and then there are some revelations that come to mind, regarding the body.
Y después, ya estando en Colombia, sucede paralelamente la muerte de George Floyd y el asesinato de los niños en Cali de Llano Verde.
Yes, and then, at the same time, in a parallel, when I was in Colombia, the George Floyd assassination happened, and the children from
Llano Verde.
Llano Verde in Colombia.
Y bajo todas las preguntas que podrían surgir en ese momento, lo que para mí fue totalmente claro, más bien revelador, fue pensar,
And then out of all the questions that actually come to mind around that time, what became very clear to me out of all of what I was thinking,
¿qué hacía que un oficial de policía, que es una persona con estudios,
how could a police officer, somebody with some degree of education,
pensara que podría aplicar todo el peso de un cuerpo a un cuello?
that somebody could apply all the weight of one's body onto one neck?
Porque había una noción o un ideal de que es un supercuerpo
Yeah, because I guess the notion was there that there was a super body, as you know,
es más resistente,
is more enduring, stronger.
está hecho para soportar más.
It is made to support even more.
Entonces todas esas inquietudes quedan en mi cabeza y comienzo a pensarme todos los mitos que hay alrededor del cuerpo negro.
And then all of those ideas remain in my mind, and I started thinking about all the myths that surround, the black body,
Y son muchos.
and there are a lot of them,
Desde lo sexual,
from the sexual,
eh, desde lo químico, lo biológico.
from the chemistry, biological.
Siempre hay mitos que rodean al cuerpo negro.
There always have been myths surrounding the black body,
Y algunos llegan a rayar la estupidez.
and some people tend to believe this stupidity.
Y ahí nace lo risible.
And from there, then the laughable part comes about.
¿Cómo podemos llegar a pensar que esos mitos son reales?
How can one come to believe that those myths are actually reality?
Entonces, en esta parte lo que hago básicamente es exagerar o hacer totalmente literal.
Yeah, in this area, what I do is I tend to exaggerate or literally do.
Lo que he podido abstraer que la gente piensa alrededor del cuerpo negro.
Yeah, what I've come to believe that people do think about the black body.
Y como soy de un humor negro,
And since I have also, black humor,
nace la enciclopedia del bla bla bla,
that's where the encyclopedia from the blah 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 encyclopedia comes about,
donde pueden encontrar todo lo que rodea al misterioso cuerpo negro.
where you can always find everything that surrounds the mysterious black body.
Y por último, para cerrar, digamos, con lo invisible,
And then in closing, to finalize the invisible part,
es exponer básicamente la realidad de la falsedad de esos supercuerpos.
yeah, is to basically reveal and expose the falsehood of that super body.
Entonces, en esa pieza lo que hay es una especie de cementerio o cuerpos enterrados.
And in that part, what you will see is that there's like a graveyard of bodies that are actually buried,
Que primero hacen parte del paisaje,
that first become part of the landscape,
porque esos asesinatos, esas muertes se convierten en parte del paisaje.
because all those assassinations and all those deaths actually do become part of the landscape.
Pero poco a poco la naturaleza misma de esta tierra
But but in terms of the nature itself of this landscape
hace que desaparezcan.
makes them disappear.
Entonces ahí condenso lo visible, lo risible y lo invisible alrededor del cuerpo negro.
And that's where everything comes together there for the visible, the invisible, and the laughable about the black body.
Y con Lola
And with Lola,
hablábamos ayer de que parte de lo risible
and what we're talking about yesterday as part of the laughable part,
no era sacado de mi imaginación,
it did not come out of my imagination.
era incluso sacado de revistas científicas que aseguraban que las personas negras no son tan inteligentes como las blancas.
Yeah, it was actually, taken out of encyclopedias that were actually assuring people that black people were not as smart as others.
Y también hablábamos sobre cómo también se hacía una promoción del cuerpo negro como la promoción del cuerpo superatleta.
Yeah, and then we're talking about how actually the black body is promoted, as a body of a super athlete.
Es en ciertos casos realidad de que los grandes atletas
And in some occasions, that is true, that they are great athletes
son humanos.
and they're human beings. I mean,
Y hablando sobre eso, encontrábamos también cómo los cuerpos eran objetualizados.
Yeah, and as we talked about that, we came to understand how the bodies became objects,
Hasta en la publicidad.
even in publicity.
Entonces, una de las imágenes, por ejemplo, es un dulce, un postre,
One of the images, for example, was a dessert, a candy.
que se llamaba, porque ahorita se llama Nito, pero antes se llamaba Negrito.
Yeah, that used now it's called Nito. Before that, used to be called Negrito.
Y el eslogan
And the slogan used,
es: soy lo más rico, soy baratico, soy negrito.
I am, the tastier. I am, also cheap. I am el Negrito.
Y la imagen era un nativo africano.
And the image was actually an African native.
Entonces, todos esos imaginarios es una comercial, digamos,
Yeah.
publicitario de los 80.
And that was, a publicity campaign from the 80s.
Hace que todas esas personas de esa época
So all of those people that grew up around that period,
puedan tener el imaginario de los negritos baraticos.
yeah, they may have the image of a Negrito who is also cheap.
Y es así también como encuentro la relación de cómo lo que uno ve
And that's how I find a relationship also between what you see
también hace que puedas ver cuáles son tus posibilidades.
and it also makes you realize what your set of possibilities are.
Y podría regresar a un ejemplo muy claro aquí en Chicago.
And I could come back to a clear example here in Chicago.
Y yo me imagino que muchos niños negros
And I imagine that a lot of black children
ahora pueden decir que también quieren ser presidente.
now they can say that they now want to be president.
Maybe pause here and open up for some conversation between the two of you. Okay. Because I think there's a lot of rich materials that you've already raised. And I think one thing maybe just to start off the conversation and to have you guys talk a bit about the shared practices is I want to ask you a question about how you think about the archive, right? There's an encyclopedia of blah, blah, blah in your show. So how do you use the kind of materials, images, in books, in advertising? How do you think about them? How do you come to incorporate found images and objects into your art practice? Maybe we can start with Lola first and then move to Carmenza.
Yeah, I don't know, the pathology of Blackness to prove inferiority is pretty much global. And so you're able to pull from this global kind of universe of imagery to use, whether it's in scholarship or in your practice. But my imagery stems from mythology, the myths surrounding deviancy in Blackness, whether it's in sexuality or in nature. And so subverting the idea that sexuality is deviant. It also goes into that ridiculousness. It's natural, sexuality is a natural thing. So to appoint one group of people more deviant because of their skin color or their practices, it's quite absurd. And so that imagery in my practice comes up in very mundane imagery, but it's also juxtaposed against very egregious imagery. There's a piece I'll reference, a video performance titled "I Am a Clay Artist," and it's a video of me rubbing my hands together in a moisturizing-like manner, and I'm using clay slip to do that. And the clay slip is very white. In this video, my hands are manicured with very long red nails. And so at times it seems like my hand gestures are very mundane and it looks like I may be moisturizing myself with lotion, but at times it also looks like I'm performing an egregious act. Um, and it teeters on that line of, you know, sexual content or very mundane content. And so that becomes very implicative. And it's up to the viewer to decide essentially whether that is pornographic material or whether it's just a person rubbing their hands together with clay slip. But I think the blackness of my hands and the red nails kind of lean towards the latter. But that's the imagery that I tend to use within my practice. It's me leaning towards that deviancy to kind of implicate the viewer, because I think then the labor isn't lying with me. It's able to be transferred into the viewer and for them to make up themselves whether or not what they're viewing is, you know, is appropriate to them, or if, well, you know, what are you thinking when you're viewing this material? What references come to mind? What about Blackness comes up in your mind? So it's a very implicative practice when I'm using visual images in regards to mythology. But yeah.
Bueno, en mi caso,
Well, in my case,
voy a responder esto con otra anécdota.
I'm going to respond with another anecdote.
Hace unos meses estaba haciendo una entrevista con Nicolás Vizcaíno, un curador colombiano,
I was doing an interview with Nicolás Vizcaíno, a Colombian artist.
que también es afro, ¿no?
He's also Afro.
Y él me preguntaba que por qué los artistas afro siempre teníamos que estar trabajando alrededor del cuerpo negro.
And then he asked me why do Afro artists always have to be working regarding the issue of the body, the black body.
Y mencionaba artistas afro
And he would
norteamericanos
mention Afro-American artists
que trabajaban con o se interesaban por otro tipo de cosas que estaban lejos de la imagen del cuerpo negro.
that would work and would move away from working, away from the image of the black body.
Entonces yo le decía que yo hacía parte de una generación
And then I told him that I was part of a generation
de artistas
of artists
que tenía la gran responsabilidad
who had the big responsibility
de salir de todos estos temas, de evacuar todos estos temas,
to move away from these subjects and evacuate all these subjects,
para que cuando mis hijos quisieran ser artistas,
so that when the time came, my children, who, if they wanted to be artists,
no les tocara hablar solo de cuerpos negros,
so that they wouldn't have to at that time only talk about black bodies,
porque ya habrían las suficientes representaciones para que él no tuviera esa tarea.
because there were a lot of people already representing and doing that duty, so he didn't have to do it, or they didn't have to do it themselves.
Entonces en el momento le decía que los artistas que seguíamos hablando de cuerpos negros, siendo negros,
And then I told him that at that time, the artists who were talking about black bodies being, black themselves,
lo que estábamos haciendo era ponernos al día
that what we were doing, we were actually coming up to date
y rescatar las memorias
and to rescue all the memories
de nuestros pueblos en la historia del arte.
from our own town, from our own places in the history of art.
Y que era por eso que todavía faltaban muchos años
And that it was because of that reason that we still had many years to go,
y que todavía los artistas tendríamos que trabajar con nuestros propios cuerpos como figura política.
and that our artists, we still have to work with our own bodies as for political means,
Para poder lograr esa, entre comillas, nivelación.
so that we can actually achieve some degree of, quote unquote, leveling,
Después
parity,
de tanta censura.
after so much censure.
Y de tanta invisibilización.
and so much invisibility.
Por ejemplo, en Colombia, las artes plásticas no tienen tantos representantes afrodescendientes como otras artes, como la música o la literatura.
Yeah, for example, in Colombia, all the artists that, whose medium is plastic, they don't have a whole lot of Afro representation as they would do in music and literature.
No porque no hayan existido,
It is not because they don't exist,
sino porque su procedencia no era importante.
but because, in their mind, that was not important.
Porque su expresividad no era digna de ser arte, sino fue mal llamada, entre comillas, artesanía, además de eso de tener una relación pues equívoca con ambos términos, ¿no?
Yeah, and the way they were actually grew up thinking was that their craft was not art, but it was basically just craftsmanship, and the inability for both to understand the two words.
Entonces los negros no eran artistas, sino artesanos.
And so the blacks were basically not artists; they were artisans.
Y entonces por eso trabajo todavía con el cuerpo.
And that's why I'm still working with the body.
Y porque de alguna u otra forma las personas afro tenemos el chip de pensar siempre de esa forma.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, I believe that Afro people still have that chip that they programmed to think that way.
Uno piensa en blanco y negro.
I mean, most people tend to think in black and white.
To make sure we take questions from the audience. So if people have questions, you can raise your hand. There is a microphone that we will pass around. I also have more questions, but just want to make sure we get in questions from the audience if there are any at this moment. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. On now.
Yeah.
Now on. Yes, I would like to talk a little bit about controversy and polemics, and kind of let the audience in on a somewhat more secret dimension of this project, this exhibition. Those of you who have seen it online or in person will perhaps know what I'm talking about, but of course later on you'll all have a chance to see the exhibition. So the visible part of the exhibition is a sculpture that Carmenza initially devised to be shown in public as a public installation. And it consists of a number of figures, life-size figures, a black girl and 4 sets of clothes that you can put on, like paper clothes, right? This is a work that was put outside according to the artist's wishes, but became the subject of controversy locally. And after a couple of weeks of debate, people kind of, passers-by having problems with the work, it was decided that the installation had to be moved, would be moved inside, and is now on view inside. And of course, the point of your installation was to, in a way, raise this controversy, right? To provoke, to a certain extent, right? You're interested in provocation. And I'm curious, we're talking about Cali and Chicago and how these cities are similar in your perception. But obviously there's also many differences. And one of the differences may perhaps have to do with the sensitivities that exist locally. Vis-a-vis the depictions of the black body in public. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the use of parody in your work, and perhaps this is also something that Lola can address. And you know, I want you to talk a little bit more about this idea of provocation, really, and polemics and you know, teasing. ¿Qué tal?
Bueno,
Okay, well,
siempre en mi producción he buscado, ¿sabes? Mover.
yeah, during
Es,
my
es la
production,
palabra.
I always enjoy moving. You know, moving is the word.
Siento que cuando, cuando vemos una exposición o todo lo que pasó alrededor de la instalación, que fue incómoda,
And when I see that, all of what happened during that, you know, showing of this particular installation,
pienso que hay una rectificación de mi intención como artista.
and then what that becomes is basically, you know, a ratification of my art as an artist,
Porque mi idea era señalar.
because my idea was exactly to point that out.
Y todas las reacciones que se generen alrededor de eso, para mí es la continuación de mi trabajo, la rectificación de mi trabajo. Te preguntaste sobre eso.
And all of the consequences that occur around that particular issue, that's the nature of my work. I mean, that's what is there to question.
La idea es meter el dedo en la llaga.
Yeah, the idea is to put your finger on the wound.
Para mí fue una gran sorpresa cuando encontré, digamos, los comentarios de que habían diversas reacciones.
For me, it was quite a surprise when I heard the comments that there were, you know, diverse opinions and reactions.
Porque lo primero que me pregunté fue, vamos, esto es lo que se ve en las calles.
You know, because, you know, for me, it's just simply saying, hey, that's what you see on the street.
Pero si hago un dibujo, una instalación de eso,
But if I make a drawing or I make an installation around that,
tal vez no lo veías tan claro
maybe, you know, it couldn't be seen as clearly
como en el dibujo.
as you see it on the drawing.
Y básicamente que se generen esos diálogos o esos enfrentamientos ante ese pensamiento o reflexión
And to create that kind of dialogue and that kind of confrontation around that thought,
es lo que creo que uno tiene como el poder como artista.
and that's actually what I think, you know, the artistic power that one has,
Es decir, vamos a hablar de esto.
is to say, are we going to talk about this?
¿Lo habías visto?
Have you even seen it?
I didn't know that there were some censorship issues with the work that you were doing, which is very ironic. It's interesting how people are threatened and how much they're uncomfortable with the mirror side of the body, whether it's a paper cutout or, you know, an image of the body. But the work isn't visually sensitive, so that's why it's very surprising that happened. But then again, that's another discussion about censorship and art, and that can go on for ages. But I will talk about how parody enters my practice, which is quite similar. It's taking the irony, right, and kind of flipping it and putting that on display. For me, it's taking the body out of its original context. For example, I have a series of Polaroid images, which I titled Nudes. They're maybe 2 inches by 3 inches at most of nude Polaroid images of my body, but they're very cropped. So these could be images of my ankles, the folds in my arms, you know, the small of my back. But they're very cropped. So you're not able to tell what part of the body you're actually looking at. It could look like a butt, it could look like, you know, an armpit, it could look like a set of lips, but I think the irony lies in that because they're matted and they're framed. And so the presentation itself takes the Polaroid out of its original context, which is to be, a throwaway photograph or something to be shared or something that's temporary, and not completely of, high value. But doing the matting in the framing of that small image kind of elevates that image and that value in a sense. It also adds an element of voyeurism. Um, People think they know Black features and they really don't. And so when they're confronted with that, they're usually threatened or they're usually uncomfortable, right? Which I find very interesting. And then it enters this conversation of racialized voyeurism that we see a lot today happening, whether it's through media or through our social contexts or intellectual contexts or what have you. But parody is pretty much me displaying and giving you this imagery that might look like something, but it's totally different from what you're actualizing it as. Which for me, it's funny because again, you don't know Black features, right? You assume that you do. But yeah, people are quick to use those features as well for their own benefit, which is also something I take and I talk about within the work. But yeah.
I got it. Yeah, thank you. Hi, I just wanted to say regarding your work that was outside, my daughter and I would walk past it every day. We had nowhere to go inside, right, during the pandemic. And we enjoyed it very much. And I'm Black, but I'm not sure if there's any Black people that work at Neubauer Collegium. But when I walk around campus here, I also work here. A lot of the security are Black people. They're people that I have relationships with sometimes so I can get into buildings without problems. And I think it's very telling that we're a bastion of free speech, and something that was very provocative and interesting for people of all ages. Myself, my daughter's 4, enjoyed engaging with your work. So thank you. And Lola, good to see you.
Yeah.
That's all. I don't have a question.
Hi, thank you both for just sharing more of your work with me and with all of us. I'm curious, I know that we talked a little bit about how the landscape of Black Death is that it takes these bodies and they become part of the landscape that then continues to proliferate death and invisibility. And I'm curious, with Lola, your mention about the use of framing and angles in your work to think about how you set an artistic context that like brings forth that landscape that you see of this invisibility aspect. I'm curious like how different tools you use to create your work is showing that type of landscape. I'm not sure if that's clear, but thank you.
Yeah. I think about access a lot, access to materials, especially being from the diaspora, my mother being African American, my father being Nigerian American. I think about access quite a lot. And so I'm able to pull from these different cultures as far as material or materiality goes, and kind of creating a world or creating landscapes, right? And so when I think about clay and how easy it is to manipulate and work with, but also how heartbreaking it is to work with as well. It's both durable and both fragile at the same time. And I think that speaks a lot to Black existence, how fragile that actually is. But how strong it seems to be on the outside looking in. I think um, toying with strength and vulnerability is something that I lean towards in regards to Black existence, and and elevating that importance that people see that both can exist at one time in one person and one identity. But yeah, I, materiality is something I use I keep in mind a lot as far as maybe adornment goes. I think about adornment a lot, um, both taken from my dad and my mother, and the use of jewelry and the use of bling in my work, and bedazzling things with rhinestones and necklaces or chains. And so having access is something that everyone doesn't have. And so I'm using materials that I have access to and keeping that in mind. Um, yeah, I hope that answers your question on some level.
Yo primero no tengo como un único medio de expresión.
Yeah, for me, I don't have one unique way of expression, you know.
Entonces, todo lo que uso termina siendo también circunstancial.
Yeah, everything I use actually ends up being circumstantial.
Y básicamente, toda mi producción básicamente son comentarios.
And all my production realmente really are comments.
A las cosas que siento al ser una mujer afro.
You know, the things I feel being an Afro-American woman.
Y básicamente desde lo matérico hasta la idea misma es producto de situaciones puntuales.
You know, and everything in terms of my idea, you know, comes from that point.
Por ejemplo, en esta pieza que está acá afuera, la del monumento a los héroes caídos.
Yeah, and like the piece that we have outside, which is you know, an ode to the fallen.
Tiene que ver mucho con la palabra tierra.
That has a lot to do with the word earth.
O cuando la gente dice como el lugar de las oportunidades, por ejemplo.
Like when people say, for example, instead of opportunities, for example.
Siempre se habla de un territorio.
You always talk about a territory.
Pero creo yo que ese territorio esconde muchos cadáveres negros.
Yeah, but I think that territory always hides a lot of you know, black bodies, you know,
que se hacen parte del paisaje.
That have become part of the landscape.
Entonces esa cosa profética está hecha literal.
So that's a little prophetic expression.
Y así tiene que ver mucho como la producción que hago. Es una cosa circunstancial.
And that's kind of how I, you know, a lot of what I do has to do with that, a lot of circumstantial.
Entonces, lo matérico tiene que ver mucho con el momento y de lo que quiero hablar.
You know, so a lot of what I do has to do with, you know, what's up with me at the moment and what I want to talk about.
Es por eso que como artista me queda muy difícil definirme en una línea de producción.
And that's why as an artist it's very hard for me to define myself in a production.
El material es aquello que me ayude a hacer más sentido.
Yeah, the materials for me are a function of, you know, what's best for me to, you know, to make sense.
Great. I think this is actually a really nice place to close this conversation. We'll have DJ Soul Phonetics will be providing some music for us. There's some snacks in the back. We hope that you will all do a tour of the show, see it. I think, Dieter, do you want to give specific instructions about how to do that?
Yes, first left, then right. So the exhibition can be viewed in the following ways, and I apologize for, you know, the disciplinary nature of the experience, but so we'll enter via the back door, and then the first space that we can visit is the gallery. which is where the chapter, the Laughable chapter is located. And then you'll go straight on to what is called the Forum, where the visible chapter of the exhibition is installed, which is the one that caused the polemic back in May. And then finally, outside here on the lawn is where the invisible chapter of the exhibition is situated. And we can only allow 3 people at a time into the gallery. So there were 3 people going in, and then as soon as those 3 leave, masked, obviously, I must add, as soon as those 3 leave to move on to the forum, the next 3 can be allowed in. I think there's some karmic irony at work in the fact that an exhibition like this has to be policed the way it is. But, there we have it. Anyway, everyone, please enjoy yourself with the exhibition and all of the goodness on offer. And thank you, of course, for the panel.
And I just want, before we close, I first really want to thank Lola for joining us, Carmenza coming all the way from Cali, Colombia with her mother, and a very, very special thanks to the Neubauer Collegium staff, especially Jessica Musselwhite, who has done enormous work to make this possible. So thank you all. Enjoy the music and food. And please come up and talk to Carmenza and Lola as well.